mocked as a rookie, until everyone saw she belonged to Navy's top tier. Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Naval Station Norfolk, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder and determination burning in her dark eyes. At 22, she looked younger than her years, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, with a slight frame that made her appear fragile among the towering recruits around her. The salty Virginia air hit her face as she joined the line of new arrivals, each one looking nervous but trying to hide it behind forced confidence. The other recruits towered over her like giants. There was Jake Morrison from Texas, a former college football player whose shoulders seemed to span doorways. Next to him stood Michael Chen, a former Marine who'd carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had already proven himself in combat. Behind them, Rebecca Turner, a former Olympic swimmer whose athletic build spoke of years of disciplined training. Sarah felt invisible among these titans, just another face in the crowd who probably wouldn't make it past the first week. "Look what we got here," Jake whispered to Michael as they watched Sarah struggle to keep up with the group's long strides. "Did they start recruiting from high schools now?" His comment earned snickers from several nearby recruits, and Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she kept walking, her jaw set with quiet determination. The truth was, Sarah had fought harder than any of them just to be here. Growing up in a small town in New Mexico, she had been the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep their tiny apartment. Maria Martinez cleaned offices at night, worked at a diner during the day, and took in sewing on weekends, all while raising Sarah and her younger brother Carlos. Money was always tight, dreams seemed like luxuries they couldn't afford, and college felt as distant as the moon. But Sarah had always been different. While other kids her age were worried about social media and dating, she was reading military history books borrowed from the library and watching documentaries about naval operations. She had grown up hearing stories about her grandfather, Roberto Martinez, who had served on a destroyer during World War II. He had died before she was born, but his medals sat in a small wooden box on their kitchen table, and his photograph in his Navy uniform hung in their tiny living room like a beacon of possibility. "The Navy saved my father's life," Maria would tell Sarah during their quiet moments together. "He was just a poor kid from the barrio, but the Navy gave him purpose, training, and pride. He used to say the ocean didn't care where you came from, only where you were going." These words had planted seeds in Sarah's mind that grew stronger with each passing year. In high school, while her classmates were planning beach trips and shopping sprees, Sarah was working part-time at a local garage, learning basic mechanics and saving every penny she earned. She studied navigation using old charts she found at garage sales and taught herself basic seamanship from books. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Perrol Rodriguez, noticed her unusual interests and helped her research military careers. "You know, Sarah," Mrs. Dementia Liv Rodriguez had said during one of their meetings, "the Navy has programs that could not only give you the career you want, but also help you support your family." That conversation changed everything. Sarah learned about the nuclear power program, one of the most challenging and prestigious technical tracks in the Navy. It required extensive testing, months of intensive schooling, and the kind of mental toughness that broke many recruits. But successful graduates became part of an elite community that operated the Navy's most sophisticated vessels. The testing process had been grueling. Sarah spent months preparing, studying advanced mathematics and physics concepts that her small-town high school had barely touched. She took practice tests until her eyes burned and worked extra shifts at the garage to pay for prep books. When the test day came, she scored in the top 5% nationally, earning her a guaranteed spot in the nuclear program if she could survive basic training and nuclear school. But standing here at Norfolk, watching the other recruits joke and bond while shooting glances at her like she was a lost child, Sarah wondered if academic scores were enough. The Navy wasn't just about books and tests. It was about physical strength, mental toughness, and earning the respect of your peers. And right now, she could see in their eyes that respect was the last thing they were offering her. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez appeared before them like a storm cloud, his weathered face showing 30 years of naval service. His voice could cut through steel when he wanted it to. And right now, he definitely wanted it to. "Listen up, recruits. For the next 8 weeks, I own your sorry lives. You will eat when I say eat, sleep when I say sleep, and breathe when I say breathe. Some of you think you're tough because you played sports or lifted weights. Some of you think you're smart because you scored high on tests. Let me tell you something. The Navy doesn't care about your high school glory days or your test scores. The Navy cares about one thing. Can you do the job when lives depend on it? His eyes swept over the group and paused on Sarah for just a moment longer than the others. You see that ocean over there? It doesn't care how big you are or how many push-ups you can do. It will swallow you whole if you're not ready for it. My job is to make sure you are ready. And if you're not willing to give me everything you've got, you can catch the next bus home right now. The first few days of basic training were exactly as brutal as Sarah had expected, but in ways she hadn't prepared for. The physical challenges were tough but manageable. She had been running and doing bodyweight exercises for months in preparation. It was the social dynamics that proved more challenging than any obstacle course. During mealtimes in the galley, conversations would die down when she approached tables, not because people disliked her personally, but because they simply didn't see her as relevant to their experience. They talked about football strategies, military history, and their plans for advanced training. But somehow the conversation never included her. It wasn't malicious exclusion. It was almost worse. It was indifference. "Hey, Martinez!" Jake called out during one lunch break, his tone friendly but condescending. "You sure you're in the right place?" "I heard they're starting a junior ROTC program at the high school down the road." The table erupted in laughter, and even some of the recruits who hadn't been part of the joke smiled and shook their heads. Sarah took a bite of her sandwich and looked up calmly. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Morrison. But thanks for your concern." Her voice was steady, but inside her stomach was churning. She had dealt with doubters before, but never while living with them 24 hours a day. The academic portions of basic training revealed a different side of Sarah. While other recruits struggled with navigation calculations and maritime law, she absorbed the material like a sponge. During study periods, she would finish her assignments quickly and then help struggling classmates understand complex concepts. Slowly, a few recruits began to appreciate her sharp mind, even if they still questioned her physical capabilities. Martinez actually explained that whole GPS triangulation thing in 5 minutes, Rebecca admitted to Michael one evening. "I'd been staring at that textbook for an hour and getting nowhere." It was a small crack in the wall of indifference, but Sarah noticed it and felt a tiny spark of hope. However, respect in the military isn't earned in classrooms alone. Physical fitness tests, obstacle courses, and practical seamanship exercises carried more weight than perfect test scores. And it was during these practical exercises that Sarah's size and strength disadvantages became most apparent to everyone, including herself. The rope climbing exercise was particularly humiliating. While Jake scaled the 30-foot rope like a spider, and Rebecca used her swimmer's upper body strength to power up efficiently, Sarah struggled with every inch. Her technique was perfect. She had studied the proper method extensively, but her small hands could barely grip the thick rope, and her limited upper body strength made progress painfully slow. "Come on, Martinez," Chief Rodriguez shouted from below. "My grandmother could climb faster than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. The other recruits tried to hide their smiles, but Sarah could feel their amusement. She finally reached the top, dead last and breathing hard, her hands raw and bleeding from the rope burns. That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk, listening to the gentle snores of her bunkmates and staring at the ceiling. Her hands throbbed, her shoulders ached, and doubt crept into her mind like fog rolling in from the ocean. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe she was too small, too weak, too different to belong here. Maybe she should take Chief Rodriguez's advice and catch the next bus home. But then she remembered her mother's calloused hands as they counted out quarters for grocery money, and her brother Carlos asking if she would really become a sailor like their grandfather. She thought about the photograph of Roberto Martinez in his crisp Navy uniform, young and proud and ready to serve something bigger than himself. He had been small too, probably no bigger than Sarah, but he had found his place in the vast machinery of naval warfare. Sarah pulled out a small notebook she kept hidden in her personal effects and began writing. Not a letter home or a journal entry, but technical notes about rope climbing. She analysed what she had done wrong, researched alternative techniques, and developed a training plan to improve her grip strength and technique. If she couldn't outmuscle the rope, she would have to outsmart it. This became Sarah's pattern. Every failure became a lesson. Every weakness became a project. When she struggled with the obstacle course, she studied the physics of momentum and leverage to find more efficient ways to navigate the barriers. When she couldn't keep up during long runs, she researched breathing techniques and pacing strategies used by distance runners. A bunkmate, Jessica Walsh from Ohio, noticed Sarah's midnight study sessions. "You know you don't have to prove anything to these guys, right?" Jessica whispered one night. "Half of them won't make it through nuclear school anyway." Sarah looked up from her notes on maritime navigation. "I'm not trying to prove anything to them. I'm trying to prove something to myself." It was during the third week of basic training that Sarah got her first real chance to show what she was made of. The recruits were participating in a practical seamanship exercise aboard a training vessel in the Chesapeake Bay. They were divided into teams and given various shipboard tasks to complete under time pressure, simulating emergency conditions at sea. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with Jake, Michael, and 2 other recruits, working on damage control procedures. Their task was to simulate responding to a hull breach, which involved setting up pumps, shoring damaged bulkheads, and managing water flow while maintaining ship stability. It was complex work that required both physical effort and technical knowledge. The exercise began chaotically. Jake immediately took charge, assigning tasks based on his assumptions about everyone's abilities. "Martinez, you handle the paperwork and calculations," he said dismissively. "We'll take care of the heavy lifting." It was clear he saw her as useful only for the mental work, not the physical challenges of actual damage control. But Sarah had other plans. While Jake and Michael struggled to position a heavy pump correctly, Sarah noticed they were fighting against the ship's list instead of working with it. "Wait!" she called out. "If we position the pump 15 degrees to starboard, we can use the ship's angle to improve water flow efficiency by about 20%. Jake looked annoyed at being interrupted. "We've got it handled, Martinez. Just focus on your calculations." "The calculations show we're wasting time and energy," Sarah insisted, stepping forward to help reposition the pump. "If we don't adjust now, we'll fail the timing requirement." Michael looked at the pump, then at Sarah's suggested angle, and something clicked. She's right, the water flow would be much more efficient from that position. He helped Sarah adjust the pump placement, and immediately the improvement was obvious to everyone. What happened next surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. As the exercise continued, she found herself naturally taking on more and more leadership responsibilities, not because she was pushy or aggressive, but because her suggestions consistently improved their team's performance. Her small size actually became an advantage in the cramped spaces between bulkheads, allowing her to reach valve controls and inspect fittings that the larger recruits couldn't access. "Martinez, can you squeeze through that access panel and check the valve alignment?" Michael asked, no longer treating her like a liability but like a valuable team member. Sarah disappeared into the narrow space between decks, her small hands deftly checking connections and adjusting controls. "Valve is partially closed," she called back. "Probably why we're not getting full pressure." Her voice was confident now, no longer the quiet uncertainty of the first few weeks. As their team worked together, something shifted in the dynamic. Jake still took point on the heaviest lifting, but he began asking for Sarah's input on technical decisions. Michael started treating her suggestions with the same respect he showed the other team members. By the end of the exercise, their team had completed the damage control scenario faster and more efficiently than any of the other groups. Chief Rodriguez watched the exercise from the ship's bridge, making notes on his clipboard. His expression was unreadable, but Sarah caught him nodding approvingly as their team secured their equipment. When they assembled for debriefing, his comments were brief but significant. "Team 3 showed excellent problem-solving and adaptive leadership," he announced. "When your initial approach isn't working, smart sailors adjust their tactics instead of just working harder at the wrong solution." His eyes met Sarah's for just a moment, and she saw something there that hadn't been there before. Not quite approval, but acknowledgement. That evening in the barracks, the atmosphere around Sarah was subtly different. Jake still made his jokes, but they were less cutting, more inclusive. Rebecca asked her opinion about an upcoming navigation test. Michael invited her to join a study group that had previously excluded her. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was progress. Sarah understood that she was fighting a different kind of battle than her fellow recruits. They were proving they could meet the Navy standards, while she was proving she belonged among them at all. Every small victory mattered. Every demonstration of competence and courage moved her a little closer to the acceptance she needed, not just to survive basic training, but to thrive in the challenging nuclear program that lay ahead. The 4th week of basic training brought the combat swimming assessment, and with it, Sarah's most daunting challenge yet. The test required recruits to swim 50 meters in full uniform, tread water for 10 minutes, and then demonstrate basic water rescue techniques. For someone who had learned to swim in a community center pool back in New Mexico, the thought of performing these tasks in the choppy waters of the Chesapeake Bay was terrifying. Sarah had been dreading this moment since arrival. While Rebecca Turner moved through water like a dolphin, effortlessly gliding through each stroke, and even the larger recruits like Jake relied on their natural buoyancy and strength, Sarah knew she would have to rely entirely on technique and determination. Her slight frame, which had been a disadvantage in most physical challenges, might actually work against her in the water where buoyancy mattered as much as skill. The night before the assessment, Sarah could barely sleep. She reviewed swimming techniques in her mind, visualizing each stroke and kick, but no amount of mental preparation could change her physical limitations. At 0500 hours, Chief Rodriguez marched them down to the pier, where a small boat waited to transport them to the testing area. "Listen up, recruits!" Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning mist rolling off the bay. "The ocean doesn't care if you're scared. It doesn't care if you had a bad day or if you miss your mummy. When you're on a ship and something goes wrong, water becomes your biggest enemy or your pathway to safety. Today we find out which one it'll be for you." As they motored out to the testing area, Sarah watched Rebecca doing stretching exercises with the casual confidence of someone who had spent half her life in competitive pools. Jake was joking with Michael about how easy this would be compared to football practice in the Texas heat. Sarah remained quiet, focusing on her breathing and trying to calm the nervous energy coursing through her system. The first part of the test was the 50-meter swim in full uniform. One by one, recruits dropped into the dark water and began their swim to the marker buoy. Rebecca completed the distance in what seemed like seconds, her stroke efficient and powerful. Jake relied on brute force, churning through the water with determination if not grace. Michael's marine training showed in his methodical, steady approach. When Sarah's turn came, she stepped to the edge of the boat and looked down at the dark water below. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. The bay looked so vast, so cold, so different from the chlorinated safety of the community center pool where she had practiced. Chief Rodriguez watched her hesitation with sharp eyes. "Problem, Martinez?" His voice carried that familiar edge of challenge. Sarah took a deep breath, thinking of her grandfather Roberto and the battles he must have fought on waters far more dangerous than this. "No problem, Chief. Just getting focused." She dropped into the water and immediately felt the shock of the cold bay water soaking through her uniform. The heavy fabric of her Navy-issued clothing dragged against her movements, making each stroke more difficult than anything she had experienced in practice. But Sarah had prepared for this. During her midnight study sessions, she had researched swimming techniques used by Navy SEALs and other maritime specialists. She knew that in heavy clothing, efficiency mattered more than speed. Sarah settled into a modified breaststroke, using longer, more deliberate movements to conserve energy while maintaining forward progress. She could hear the other recruits in the boat probably timing her and wondering if she would make it. The temptation to rush, to try to match Rebecca's speed was strong, but Sarah forced herself to maintain her pace. Halfway to the marker, her arms began to burn and her legs felt heavy as concrete. The uniform was waterlogged now, pulling her down with each movement. Doubt crept in as she realized she was moving slower than anyone else who had taken the test. But then she remembered something her mother used to say during the hardest times, when money was tight and bills seemed impossible to pay. "Mija, it doesn't matter how long it takes to get where you're going, as long as you don't stop moving forward." Sarah adjusted her stroke slightly, finding a rhythm that felt sustainable. She focused on her technique rather than her speed, making each movement as efficient as possible. The marker buoy seemed impossibly far away, but she kept swimming, one stroke after another, refusing to let the water defeat her. When she finally touched the marker and turned back toward the boat, Sarah heard something unexpected, cheering. Rebecca was leaning over the side of the boat, calling out encouragement. "Come on, Martinez, you've got this." Even Jake was nodding approvingly as he watched her steady progress back to the boat. Sarah completed the 50-meter swim dead last, but she completed it. As hands pulled her back aboard the boat, she was exhausted but triumphant. Chief Rodriguez made a mark on his clipboard without comment, but she caught the slightest nod of approval. The second part of the test was treading water for 10 minutes. This was where Sarah's research and preparation would be truly tested. While the other recruits relied on their natural strength and buoyancy to stay afloat, Sarah employed a technique she had studied called the survival float, a method of conserving energy by using minimal movement and controlled breathing to maintain position in the water. As the 10-minute timer began, Sarah settled into the water with deliberate calm. Instead of the aggressive scissor kicks and arm movements the others were using, she employed gentle sculling motions with her hands and feet, just enough to maintain her position while conserving energy. The other recruits initially looked stronger and more confident, but Sarah knew that 10 minutes was a long time to maintain high-energy movements. 3 minutes in, she could see Jake beginning to struggle, his powerful but inefficient technique starting to tire him out. 5 minutes in, Michael was breathing hard, his marine training helping but not eliminating the burn in his muscles. Rebecca, with her competitive swimming background, looked the most comfortable, but even she was working harder than Sarah. Sarah's technique was paying off. By focusing on efficiency rather than power, she was able to maintain her position with minimal energy expenditure. Her breathing remained controlled, her movements steady and sustainable. As the minutes ticked by, the other recruits began to notice her unusual approach. How is she making it look so easy? Jessica whispered to another recruit watching from the boat. 7 minutes in, Jake was visibly struggling, his head occasionally dipping below the surface before he powered back up. 8 minutes in, Michael was grimacing with effort, his jaw clenched as he fought to maintain position. Only Rebecca and Sarah seemed comfortable, though they were using completely different approaches. When Chief Rodriguez called, "Time," at the 10-minute mark, Sarah felt like she could have continued for another 10 minutes. She had found her element, not through brute strength or natural ability, but through intelligence, preparation, and technique. As she was pulled back aboard the boat, she saw genuine surprise and respect in the eyes of her fellow recruits. The final portion of the test was water rescue techniques. Recruits had to demonstrate the ability to approach a distressed swimmer, secure them safely, and transport them to safety. This required not just swimming ability, but quick thinking and leadership under pressure. Sarah was paired with Marcus Webb, a recruit from Georgia who had been struggling with the swimming portions of training. Marcus was supposed to play the role of a distressed swimmer, while Sarah demonstrated proper rescue approach and technique. As they prepared to enter the water, Marcus looked nervous. "You sure you can handle this, Martinez?" he asked, but his tone wasn't mocking. It was genuine concern. "I'm not exactly a lightweight." Sarah studied Marcus for a moment. He was right, he outweighed her by at least 60 pounds and stood nearly a foot taller. In a real emergency situation, his size could make him dangerous to approach if he panicked. But Sarah had studied rescue techniques extensively, and she knew that successful water rescue was more about psychology and technique than raw strength. "Just trust me and follow my lead," she told Marcus as they prepared to enter the water. "And remember, in a real emergency, panic kills more people than water does." When the exercise began, Marcus swam out to the designated position and began simulating distress, calling for help and flailing in the water as instructed. Sarah approached him carefully, staying just outside his reach as she had been taught. This was the critical moment. Approaching a panicked swimmer incorrectly could result in both people drowning. "Marcus!" she called out in a strong, confident voice. "I'm here to help you. I need you to calm down and listen to my instructions." But Marcus was really getting into his role, thrashing and reaching towards Sarah with the genuine desperation of someone who believed they were drowning. This was where size and strength traditionally mattered in rescue situations. Most rescuers would simply overpower the victim and secure them by force. Sarah took a different approach. Instead of fighting Marcus's panic, she used it. She allowed him to grab her, then used his own momentum and a technique she had learned from lifeguard manuals to spin behind him and secure him in a proper rescue hold. The movement was so smooth and controlled that Marcus stopped struggling in surprise. "How did you do that?" he asked, forgetting he was supposed to be maintaining his distressed swimmer role. "Physics," Sarah replied with a grin as she began towing him back toward the boat. "Leverage beats strength every time when you know how to use it properly." The watching recruits and Chief Rodriguez were all taking notes now. Sarah's rescue technique had been textbook perfect, but more importantly, it had been intelligent. She had turned her size disadvantage into an advantage by using technique and knowledge instead of trying to match Marcus's strength. As they completed the rescue exercise, Chief Rodriguez made several notes on his clipboard. When all the recruits had finished their tests, he gathered them on the boat for feedback. "Today I saw some good swimming, some poor swimming, and some learning," he began. "But I also saw something more important than any of that. I saw some of you adapt your approach when your first plan wasn't working. Martinez, you swam slower than everyone else, but you finished strong while others were struggling at the end. Your rescue technique showed me that you understand the difference between working hard and working smart." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at the unexpected praise, but Chief Rodriguez wasn't finished. "The Navy doesn't need swimmers. The Navy needs sailors." Swimming is just one skill among hundreds you'll need to master. What matters is how you approach challenges, how you adapt when things don't go according to plan, and whether you can keep your head when others are losing theirs. That evening, the dynamic in the barracks shifted again. Rebecca approached Sarah during study time with genuine curiosity about her swimming techniques. "Where did you learn that survival float thing?" "I've been swimming competitively for 10 years and I'd never seen anything like it." Sarah explained her research into military and survival swimming techniques, sharing some of the resources she had studied. Soon, she found herself surrounded by recruits asking questions about her methods and eager to learn new approaches to challenges they would face. Jake, who had struggled the most during the treading water portion, was particularly interested. "I always figured I could just power through anything physical," he admitted. "But you made it look effortless while I was dying out there. Maybe there's something to this technique stuff." It was Michael who voiced what everyone was beginning to realize. "You know, Martinez, maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong. We've been trying to prove we're tough enough for the Navy, but you've been trying to prove you're smart enough for it. And honestly, smart might be more important than tough." The conversation that followed was different from any Sarah had experienced since arriving at basic training. Instead of being tolerated or ignored, she found herself actively included in discussions about strategy and preparation. The other recruits began asking her opinion on training techniques and study methods. For the first time, she felt like she was becoming part of the team rather than someone the team had to carry. That night, Sarah wrote her first real letter home since arriving at basic training. She told her mother about the swimming test, about the challenges and victories of the past few weeks, and about the slowly growing respect she was earning from her fellow recruits. "I think Grandfather Roberto would be proud," she wrote. "I'm learning that the Navy isn't just about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about finding ways to accomplish the mission, no matter what obstacles you face. I'm still the smallest person in my company, but I'm beginning to think that might not matter as much as I thought it did." The fifth week brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for Sarah to demonstrate her unique strengths. Combat training exercises required recruits to work in teams under stress, solving tactical problems while dealing with simulated enemy contact and equipment failures. These scenarios favored recruits who could think clearly under pressure and adapt quickly to changing situations. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah's team was tasked with establishing communications with their headquarters while dealing with enemy jamming of their radio frequencies. While other teams struggled to overpower the jamming with brute force approaches, Sarah suggested a different strategy. "What if we use the jamming against them?" she proposed during a brief planning session. "If we can triangulate the source of the jamming signal, we can use it to navigate to a position where their own terrain features will block their interference." It was an unconventional approach that required understanding of radio wave propagation and terrain analysis, but Sarah's suggestion worked perfectly. Her team not only established communications first, but did so from a tactically superior position that allowed them to observe enemy movements. Chief Rodriguez watched the exercise from his command post, speaking quietly into his radio to other instructors. "We might have something special here," he murmured, watching Sarah coordinate her team's movements with growing confidence. The sixth week of basic training arrived with an announcement that would change everything for Sarah and her fellow recruits. Chief Rodriguez gathered them in the classroom after morning physical training, his expression more serious than usual. Behind him stood two officers Sarah had never seen before, a commander and a lieutenant commander, both wearing the distinctive insignia of the nuclear power program. "Recruits," Chief Rodriguez began, "today you'll be meeting with representatives from various advanced training programs. For those of you selected for nuclear power training, this is when your real education begins. The officers behind me are here to evaluate your readiness for the most demanding technical training the Navy offers." Sarah's heart raced. This was what she had been working towards since high school, the chance to join the elite community of nuclear-trained sailors who operated the Navy's most sophisticated vessels. But she also knew that academic qualifications were just the beginning. The nuclear program required sailors who could perform under extreme pressure, work effectively in teams, and demonstrate the kind of leadership potential that couldn't be measured by test scores alone. Commander Patricia Wells stepped forward, her silver hair and confident bearing speaking of decades of naval service. "The nuclear power program isn't just about technical knowledge," she announced to the assembled recruits. "We need sailors who can think critically, adapt to changing situations, and maintain composure when systems fail and lives are on the line. Over the next few days, we'll be conducting practical assessments to evaluate your potential for this program. Lieutenant Commander David Park nodded in agreement. You'll be working in teams to solve complex technical problems under time pressure. We're not just looking for the right answers, we're looking for the right thinking processes, effective communication, and leadership potential. Sarah noticed that several of her fellow recruits seemed nervous about these assessments. Jake, despite his confidence in physical challenges, looked uncomfortable with the emphasis on technical problem-solving. Michael's marine background hadn't included much reactor theory or advanced engineering concepts. Even Rebecca, who excelled at everything she attempted, seemed uncertain about this new challenge. The first assessment took place in a mock engineering space that simulated the reactor compartment of a nuclear submarine. Teams of 4 recruits were presented with a complex system failure scenario and given 90 minutes to diagnose the problem, develop solutions, and present their findings to the evaluating officers. Sarah found herself teamed with Marcus Webb, the recruit she had helped during the water rescue exercise, along with Jessica Walsh and David Kim, a quiet recruit from California who had studied electrical engineering before enlisting. As they entered the mock compartment, Sarah immediately began studying the system diagrams posted on the bulkheads. "Okay, team," she said, taking charge naturally. "We've got a reactor coolant system showing abnormal pressure readings, temperature fluctuations in the steam generator, and electrical faults in the control circuits. Let's start by mapping out the relationships between these systems." Marcus looked confused by the technical complexity, but Jessica and David began following Sarah's lead. She assigned each team member specific system components to analyze while she worked on understanding how their individual problems might be connected. "Marcus," Sarah said, "I need you to check all the manual valve positions and compare them to this standard configuration chart. Any discrepancies could indicate operator error or mechanical failure." "Jessica, can you trace the electrical circuits and look for any signs of component failure or improper connections?" "David, use your engineering background to analyze these temperature and pressure readings. Do they suggest a specific type of system failure?" As the team worked through their assignments, Sarah moved between them, helping interpret readings and suggesting additional tests. Her approach was methodical but efficient, building a comprehensive picture of the system failure by combining everyone's findings. 20 minutes into the assessment, Marcus made a discovery. "Hey Sarah, this valve position doesn't match the chart. It's supposed to be open, but it's showing closed." Sarah studied the valve in question, then checked its position against the system diagrams. "That's our primary problem," she announced with growing excitement. "That valve controls coolant flow to the steam generator. If it's stuck closed, that would explain both the pressure fluctuations and the temperature readings." David looked up from his analysis. The electrical faults could be secondary effects. If the system is trying to compensate for reduced coolant flow, it might be overloading the control circuits. Jessica nodded in agreement. The electrical problem started about 10 minutes after the mechanical issues, according to these time logs. That supports David's theory. Sarah felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. "Okay, here's what I think happened. The valve failed in the closed position, probably due to mechanical wear or foreign object interference. The reactor protection system detected the anomaly and tried to compensate by adjusting other parameters, but that created cascading failures in the electrical systems. The team spent the remaining time developing solutions and preparing their presentation. Sarah coordinated their efforts, making sure everyone understood their role in explaining the analysis to the evaluating officers. When time was called, she felt confident they had developed a comprehensive and accurate assessment of the system failure. Commander Wells and Lieutenant Commander Park listened attentively as Sarah's team presented their findings. The presentation was organized and thorough, with each team member explaining their portion of the analysis clearly and confidently. When they finished, the officers exchanged glances and made notes on their evaluation sheets. "Interesting approach," Commander Wells commented. "You identified the primary failure mode correctly and showed good understanding of system interdependencies. Martinez, you seem to have taken the lead role naturally. How did you decide on your team coordination strategy?" Sarah felt the weight of the question, knowing this was about more than technical knowledge. "Ma'am, I tried to match team members' strengths to specific aspects of the problem. Marcus has good attention to detail for manual inspections. Jessica has strong analytical skills for electrical systems, and David's engineering background made him perfect for thermodynamic analysis. My job was to coordinate their expertise and help develop the overall picture." Lieutenant Commander Park leaned forward with interest. And how did you maintain team cohesion while working under time pressure? I made sure everyone understood how their individual work contributed to solving the overall problem, Sarah replied. When people understand their importance to the mission, they perform better and communicate more effectively. The officers made more notes, then dismissed the team to continue evaluations with other groups. As they left the mock compartment, Marcus turned to Sarah with genuine appreciation. "That was amazing," he said. "I would have been completely lost in there by myself, but you made it make sense. You didn't just solve the problem. You helped all of us solve it together." Jessica and David echoed Marcus's sentiments, and Sarah realized that something significant had happened during the assessment. Not only had she demonstrated technical competence, but she had also shown leadership abilities that her fellow recruits were beginning to recognize and respect. The next day brought individual interviews with the nuclear program officers. Sarah reported to Commander Wells' temporary office at the appointed time, her dress uniform immaculate and her mind focused on the opportunity ahead. "Sit down, Martinez," Commander Wells said, reviewing a thick folder of documents. "I've been reading your file and I have to say, your journey to this point has been impressive. Test scores in the top 5%, excellent academic performance in basic training, and consistently positive evaluations from your instructors." Sarah felt a surge of pride but maintained her composure. "Thank you, ma'am. The nuclear program has been my goal since before I enlisted." "Tell me why," Commander Wells said simply. "Why nuclear power? Why not aviation, surface warfare, or any number of other specialties?" Sarah had prepared for this question, but she decided to answer from her heart rather than her head. "Ma'am, I grew up in a small town where opportunities were limited and expectations were low. My grandfather served in the Navy during World War II, and my mother always said the Navy gave him purpose and pride. I want to be part of something that matters, something that requires the best of me every single day." Commander Wells nodded, making notes. "The nuclear program is demanding. The training is longer and more intensive than almost any other technical field in the military. The operational tempo is high, the standards are unforgiving, and the responsibility is enormous. What makes you think you can handle that level of challenge?" "Ma'am, I've never been the biggest or the strongest or the fastest," Sarah replied honestly. "But I've learned that success isn't about natural ability. It's about preparation, adaptation, and perseverance. I've spent the last few weeks proving to myself and others that I belong here, and I'm ready to continue proving it for as long as necessary." The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering technical knowledge, leadership philosophy, and career goals. Commander Wells asked challenging questions about reactor theory, thermal dynamics, and electrical systems, but Sarah's preparation and genuine understanding shone through in her responses. As the interview concluded, Commander Wells stood and extended her hand. "Martinez, you've impressed me with your technical knowledge, but more importantly, you've demonstrated the kind of thinking and leadership we need in the nuclear community. Congratulations, pending completion of basic training, you're accepted into the nuclear power program." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief and excitement. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down." "I don't think you will," Commander Wells replied with a smile. "But remember, this is just the beginning. Nuclear Power School will test you in ways basic training never could. Are you ready for that?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm ready." Word of Sarah's acceptance into the nuclear program spread quickly through the barracks that evening. The reaction from her fellow recruits was overwhelmingly positive, a dramatic change from the skepticism and indifference she had faced just weeks earlier. Jake was among the first to congratulate her. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," he said during evening study time. "When you first got here, I thought you were in over your head." "I was wrong. You've earned this." Rebecca nodded in agreement. "You've shown all of us that there are different ways to be strong. Your way might be the most important one." Michael, ever practical, asked about her plans for nuclear school. "Where will you do your training? And what kind of platform are you hoping for after that?" Sarah explained that she would attend the nuclear power school in Charleston, South Carolina, followed by prototype training and eventual assignment to either a submarine or aircraft carrier. The conversation that followed was rich with genuine interest and respect, a far cry from the dismissive tolerance she had experienced early in basic training. Chief Rodriguez appeared in the barracks during this discussion, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Martinez," he called out, "walk with me." They stepped outside into the cool Virginia evening, the lights of Naval Station Norfolk twinkling across the water. Chief Rodriguez was quiet for several moments before speaking. "You know, Martinez, in 30 years of training recruits, I've seen thousands of young people come through these doors. Most of them are forgettable, good sailors who do their jobs but never really stand out. Some are memorable for the wrong reasons. Discipline problems, failures, people who wash out and go home disappointed. He paused, watching a ship pass slowly through the channel. Then there are very few who are memorable for the right reasons. People who arrive as unknowns and leave as leaders. People who don't just meet the Navy's standards but raise them. Sarah felt the weight of his words but remained quiet, sensing he had more to say. When you first arrived here, I figured you for a washout within 2 weeks. Too small, too quiet, too different from the typical recruit profile. I was wrong. He turned to face her directly. You've shown me something I don't see often. The ability to turn disadvantages into advantages, to lead through intelligence and preparation rather than intimidation, and to earn respect through performance rather than demanding it through position. Thank you, Chief. That means a lot coming from you. It should, he replied with a slight smile, because I don't give compliments lightly, but I'm also not done with you yet. These last 2 weeks of basic training will test everything you've learned, and nuclear school will be 10 times harder than anything you've faced here. The question is, are you ready for that level of challenge? Sarah thought about her journey to this point. The months of preparation, the struggles of early basic training, the gradual earning of respect from her peers, and now the acceptance into the program she had dreamed about. She thought about her mother working 3 jobs to support their family, her brother Carlos looking up to her as an example, and her grandfather Roberto who had faced his own challenges in the Navy decades earlier. Chief, I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it until I got here. The final 2 weeks of basic training passed quickly, with Sarah continuing to excel in both academic and practical exercises. Her newfound confidence and the respect of her peers created a positive feedback loop that enhanced her performance in every area. She scored at the top of her class in academic subjects, showed continued improvement in physical fitness, and demonstrated leadership abilities that impressed even the most demanding instructors. During the final week, recruits participated in a comprehensive exercise called Battle Stations, designed to test everything they had learned in a realistic shipboard emergency scenario. Teams rotated through various stations simulating damage control, medical emergencies, security threats, and system failures, all while dealing with simulated combat conditions. Sarah found herself assigned as team leader for one of the most challenging rotations, a simulated reactor emergency that required coordinating multiple damage control teams while maintaining communications with command authority. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-pressure situation that would be routine in her future nuclear career. As alarms sounded and smoke filled the training compartment, Sarah's team sprang into action. Her months of preparation and weeks of building relationships with her fellow recruits paid off as she coordinated their response with calm efficiency. Every lesson she had learned about leadership, technical problem-solving, and team dynamics came together in those intense minutes. Marcus, take Team 1 and establish emergency cooling for the reactor compartment. Jessica, I need Team 2 focusing on electrical isolation to prevent cascading failures. David, coordinate with Damage Control Central and keep me updated on overall ship status. Her commands were clear and confident, her situational awareness comprehensive, and her ability to adapt to changing conditions impressive. When unexpected complications arose during the exercise, Sarah adjusted her strategy smoothly, repositioning teams and reallocating resources as needed. The exercise concluded with Sarah's team successfully managing the simulated emergency while maintaining effective communications and preventing cascading failures. As the lights came back on and the smoke cleared, Chief Rodriguez stepped forward with the evaluating officers. Outstanding performance, Martinez, he announced. You demonstrated the kind of leadership and technical competence we expect from our nuclear-trained sailors. Your team coordination was particularly impressive under pressure. On graduation day, Sarah stood with her company in their dress blue uniforms, ready to receive their completion certificates and move on to their advanced training assignments. The young woman who had stepped off the bus 8 weeks earlier, uncertain and overlooked, had been transformed into a confident sailor with a clear path toward her goals. As families gathered for the graduation ceremony, Sarah spotted her mother Maria in the crowd, wearing her best dress and crying with pride. Next to her stood Carlos, now 17 and considering his own military service, his eyes wide with admiration for his sister's transformation. During the ceremony, Chief Rodriguez called Sarah forward to receive a special recognition award for outstanding leadership and academic performance. As he pinned the award to her uniform, he spoke quietly so only she could hear. Martinez, you came here as a question mark, and you're leaving as an exclamation point. The nuclear community is lucky to have you. After the ceremony, Sarah reunited with her family, her mother's embrace filled with all the pride and love that had sustained them both through years of struggle and uncertainty. Mija, Maria whispered, your grandfather would be so proud. You found your place in the Navy, just like he did. Sarah looked around at her fellow graduates, many of whom had become genuine friends and supporters. Jake approached with his family, introducing Sarah to his parents as the smartest sailor in our company. Rebecca exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch throughout their naval careers. Michael shook her hand with the respect of one professional recognizing another. But it was Marcus who perhaps captured the transformation best. Sarah, he said, you taught all of us that leadership isn't about being the loudest or the strongest. It's about making everyone around you better than they thought they could be. As Sarah prepared to leave Norfolk for nuclear power school in Charleston, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had arrived as an outsider, someone who clearly didn't fit the traditional mold of a naval recruit. Through intelligence, determination, and an unwavering commitment to excellence, she had not only proven herself worthy of the Navy's most demanding program, but had earned the genuine respect and admiration of her peers. The small-town girl from New Mexico was ready for the next chapter of her naval career, carrying with her the confidence that comes from overcoming doubt and the knowledge that belonging isn't about fitting in, it's about bringing your unique strengths to serve something larger than yourself. Sarah Martinez had found her place in the Navy, and the Navy was better for having her.